Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight we're going to be venturing deep into caves and the underground for some rather scary tales. So I hope you're ready, because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I went exploring with a bunch of friends at the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Portions of this place are underground. The buildings were left with hospital equipment, beds, books, patient files, literally everything. It's eerie as if a zombie apocalypse occurred and everyone left. It operated from 1864 to 1994. The facility was self-sustaining, i.e. the patients farmed the land and had all resources on campus. The years this was open, a lot of horror stories came out this place. This wasn't the modern-day psychiatric ward, more like a prison where families paid a lot of money to hide their mentally ill, or the state put undesirables. Now, there's an underground network, but was heavily blocked off with chains. However, the main buildings were easily accessible, but the access ways to the underground were blocked off inside as well. Every time we got near one of the underground tunnel systems, we could hear faint music playing. It sounded like a music box. We found a bent wired gate and attempted to file in. The music got louder, and we were all pretty freaked out. We were all promptly arrested before going into the tunnels. There's a lot of speculation about the tunnel still to this day. The new owner said he was afraid of asbestos and was fearing for our safety. He was very grim and agreed to drop charges if we never went back. We obliged happily. Still, I sometimes think of my interactions there, all of the remnants left behind, and get severely creeped out. My friends and I discovered the opening to a tunnel to the sewer system this one summer in middle school, and me and my friends started to go there to smoke and relax away from the public. There was this one spot that we liked that was dry and full of graffiti, so that was our spot, but it was pretty deep in there. One day we noticed the messages on the wall, and we knew it was fresh since we'd never seen it before. We went back again and again without any further incident. One day, me and the other two decided to skip school and go in there to chill. We were there for about half an hour, and we had just finished smoking a blunt when we started hearing a faint voice burst into laughter, followed by other voices bursting into laughter. We couldn't tell if it was coming from the entrance or the deeper part of the tunnel. We stayed quiet and started hearing the laughter getting louder and more intense. One of my friends quickly went up to the nearest manhole cover and started pushing up. My other friend went over to help, and they were able to open it. We crawled out of there onto a busy road and ran for our lives to the nearest apartment complex. We never went back after that. Next story by Adam Milanovic. I used to do a lot of exploring in my younger days, mainly when my friends and I would skip school and decide our time was better spent finding new places to explore than actually learning in a structured environment. I'm Australian, and one of our favourite places to explore was a place called White Bay Power Station, which was a coal-powered station that closed its doors on Christmas Day, 1983. We were exploring between 97 and 2000, so the decay had well and truly set in by this time. On a side note, films such as The Matrix Reloaded and Mission Impossible had parts filmed here. Anyway, this place was absolutely huge. It had all of the usual abandoned adornments, such as graffiti and satanic signs and messages scrawled over the walls. There was also a time we went and found a freshly dead pigeon, which had a noose around its neck. It was multi-leveled. The exact number of levels were too hard to determine because it would all depend on which flight of stairs you took, which part of the power station you entered from, and which actual part of the power station you were in. On some flights of stairs, you could be 8 floors up and be able to see through the metal staircase you were standing on due to it decaying from rust. The most dangerous thing about this place was the way some levels would just drop off. There would be a big concrete platform, then nothing, no railing or anything to stop you falling off. There was also a door which we opened that took us to the roof. A roof I nearly fell off of because I got dizzy from the sheer height of it. Though the scariest part of the whole power plant were the big chutes that they used to store the coal in. This is hard to explain, but I'll try my best. Imagine having 2 thin metal catwalks on either side of the huge metallic voids. You couldn't see more than 4 feet in front of you on the catwalks because of the sheer darkness, and on the inside of the voids that the coals were stored in. You couldn't see more than 4 feet in front of you on the catwalks because of the sheer darkness, and the inside of the voids that the coal was stored in were the blackest darkness you can imagine. So basically, standing on these catwalks were much like walking the plank, except you can't see anything in front of you, and if the floor below you gave way, you were done for. We also used to frequent old train tunnels in Sydney. It was quite startling to be walking through a pitch-black tunnel. Came around the bend to see the light from the other side, with the figure of a person walking towards you. This used to happen often, as the homeless and drug users would take refuge in the tunnels to either get out of the elements or to get high. Funnily enough, some of the best tunnels were put back in use for the 2000 Sydney Olympics, like tram services, and now they're all cleaned up and well lit. Another type of place we used to explore a lot were underground canals and drainage tunnels. We got so good at mapping them out that we knew which tunnels to take to get us as close as possible to the fast food outlets for lunch. We found one weird tunnel one day. We were walking along and noticed an offshoot, which made us drop to our knees and crawl. At the end of this tunnel, there was what I could only describe as a small water reservoir. The water in it was only about an inch lower than the pipe we were in, and had a newish looking ladder about 5 foot away on the left side of the pipe we were currently crouched in, and in a metal grate above it. We had to maneuver ourselves on an angle right to lip the pipe and jump to grab the ladder and climb out the gate. We found out pretty quickly that the whole thing looked so new because we were now standing in someone's backyard. I used to live on a military base in Hawaii, and there wasn't much to do there. I don't know how old I was at the time, but maybe around kindergarten. Hawaii didn't require kindergarten at the time, so I wasn't in school yet, I know that at least. Outside our house, there was a covered car park that people in the community used because the houses didn't have garages, and there were various storm drains that were around the car park. I would always play there since it was right outside our house. I wasn't the brightest, but kids can be dim, right? So one day I was playing there, and I thought it would be fun to drop a thing down the storm drain to see how far it went. I had dropped a few rocks and some small sticks and eventually ran out of things to throw in, so I started saying hello to hear my echo. I didn't expect to hear anything other than my own voice. I was surprised when I got a response. A little girl called back to me. I wasn't scared, just confused. I asked her what she was doing down there, and she said that her and her family lived there. I remembered that I kept trying to look closer, but it was so dark you couldn't see the bottom at all. We sat for a while and spoke. I don't remember the whole conversation, but it went on for a while. I vividly remember the last part of it though, because I felt so guilty and hurt. Years later, I still do, even though I'm not entirely sure it happened. She wanted to play with me, and I said I could invite her in for dinner, and she got really excited by that idea, so I ran inside and asked my mum if my friend could come over for dinner. She said no, and she wouldn't let me go back out to tell her. The next day I went out to explain to my friend what had happened, but she wasn't there. I never heard from the little girl in the drain again. I remember crying that day. I blamed my mum for me losing the only friend I had made there. My mum still remembers this thing happening, and just how upset I was because of it. One of my favorite hobbies used to be exploring old and abandoned mines, mostly for the hell of it, but occasionally you would find some sort of mineral debris that you could bring back home as a trophy. I went with friends and I went alone. It was an obsession for a long time. That is until the following event. I always used to dedicate my Saturday afternoons to exploring abandoned mines, once I knew where they were. There used to be a website that I was fairly active in, where people would share where they had found abandoned mines and potential routes for trying to explore them. I always had a lot of fun and rarely ever bumped into anyone doing the same thing I was when I was doing it. We'd built up quite a little fun online community, and one day I'm challenged by someone I knew online to check out this particular cave. It was a cave/abandoned mine. It seemed to be quite old, dating back to the mid-1800s. They were of course searching for some mineral, and I don't know whether they found it or not. Point being that it was apparently scary, but structurally rather safe. So, after doing a little bit more research, I waited for the opportune moment, i.e. a Saturday afternoon, and went on my merry way. When I reached the structure itself, which was very remote and took over a 2-hour drive to arrive to, I was pleasantly surprised. It was indeed very well preserved, and I could park my vehicle there with ease, which is something that you'll find is often more challenging than you may expect. I donned my usual gear and stepped inside. With my flashlight on, I started looking around, taking in the scene, the sight, the smells, and having my camera at the ready. I made sure, from my own point of view, that it was structurally safe, and started making my way in. This was always the best part, leaving the light behind and entering a world of darkness. It was like being swallowed whole. After a few footsteps, it became eerily dark, and the smell of damp permeated my nostrils. I loved exploring. Clearly I wasn't the first person to be here. Countless graffitis and carve masters had been here and etched their names and logos onto every corner of the wall. This is common while exploring. You'll find this early on, but when you get to the true darkness, is when people tend to shy away. The further in you go, the less artwork you see. I carried on going in, taking in all of my surroundings. I reached a part that my friend had told me about. It was a very narrow tunnel. It was almost like one of those moving walls you see in Lara Croft, or perhaps a better way to describe it, trying to move through 2 slices of almost touching bread. I don't know why they designed the tunnel this way. Surely they had a good reason. Perhaps there were some objects that they simply couldn't pass. So I shimmied my way across, flashlight at the ready, and carried on into the darkness. There were many twists and turns, and all of it fun. I also need to point out that I use a red chalk in order to mark my way. This way I never forget where I've been and can always make my way back by following the red chalk. It also helps that I draw arrows along with my lines. As I'm going along, I hear something in the distance. What sounds like water, which isn't an uncommon thing, but the sound of water is something else, as it means there's a drip. which can mean structural instability in some places. Curiosity got the better of me though. This was certainly an interesting cave. Lots of debris and lots of interesting stuff being left behind. I'd found an old mining helmet, funnily enough. I didn't dare take it though. I like to leave history where it remains, but carried on my exploration. By this point I was fairly certain that I was one of the few people who'd ever ventured this far in quite a long time. Just as I was walking though, do I hear something behind me? What sounds like footsteps? I stop in my tracks and turn around. There's no one. I'm starting to feel quite hot. The room is getting significantly smaller, and I know from my friend's description that this means I'm going to be entering a much larger cavern very soon. Excitement is building, and just as I get towards the end, it narrows even further. There's a brief slit in the rock, just enough for a man to pass, that clearly has been worked on by many men as a hole to climb through. So I look out. Looking down, I see that there's a drop, a significant one, and realize this is where I'll need my rope. Fortunately for me, I think I can make the jump, and with the rope secured, make my way down. This place was volatile as hell. There were a few holes in the middle. I think maybe that the ground gave way there, and that's when I realized it probably wasn't the best idea to be in this place. But my friend assured me that around the edges I'd be fine. I only wanted to take a few pictures and make the most of my time here before I went back. Just as a, see, I managed to do it kind of thing. That's when I heard it. The voice of my grandfather speaking. Only 2 words. Get out. They echoed through the cave, and I turned around to where the sound had originated from, to illuminate nothing and no one. The thing is, my grandfather has been dead for 20 years. This severely creeped me out. I decided to put 1 foot back on the rock and make my way with the rope back up to the small passage. I looked out again after I'd got my picture and wondered what that was all about, and told myself that it had all been in my head. I started to make my way out, thoroughly spooked, when I heard it. A loud bang and a sharp grinding sound. It was unmistakable. The hole that I had seen previously had gotten bigger and consumed some of the land from the top. Is it possible that the voice of my dead grandfather saved me? Had he kept me from falling and perishing in the abyss? Because it was my intention to stay there a while longer. If I had done so, could it have been the end of me? That seriously changed my outlook on what I was doing, and started choosing my caves more carefully the next time, and after a few more attempts I stopped going altogether. I realized just how dangerous it was, and elected to do something a little less life-threatening. Grandpa, if you're out there, thank you. One of the strangest things that ever happened to me was one time when I was first married, around 1987. I took my wife's brother and 3 nephews camping in a cave. It was located on Highway 17 near Waynesville, Missouri, near the Gasconade River that's not too far from Fort Leonard Wood. This is a huge cave and can be seen from the highway. Directly on the other side of the highway was the Ruby-Doo River. It ran along the highway and dumps right there into the Gasconade River. The cave has 2 large openings. The bigger one has a stream running out. The smaller one to the left has a high dry level place where we can all set up camp, big enough for all 5 of us. I can't remember if it was like the first or second night, but it was around 11 o'clock, and we heard what sounded like a semi-truck crossing the Gasconade River Bridge. Then all of a sudden we heard a horrendous crash, like metal bending and trees crashing, and it all grew silent, and we could hear what sounded like pieces of metal still sliding and clinging down the road, and then silence. We all jumped up and ran down there, and we found absolutely nothing. No wreckage, no broken trees, nothing. That was one of the most baffling things I've ever witnessed. I don't remember seeing any lights, but there were quite a few green trees between us and the highway. I tried to do a search on the net to see if any wreck matched what all 5 of us had heard, but I didn't have a clue how to go about it. It must have been some kind of phantom wreck. Around 8 years ago, me and some friends used to spend our weekends spelunking and exploring abandoned places at night. We didn't vandalize or anything, we would just go to take cool pictures and spook each other out. There is an old abandoned rock quarry in our county that loads of teenagers go to throw parties and get drunk. I had never been down there before, but my friends had been there, and they were a few years older than me and had partied down there before. There's a huge hill that you have to park your vehicle at the top of, and cross a gate and walk down the hill to reach the quarry. There's a huge pile of rocks in the middle of the land outside of the actual quarry caves, lots of old equipment and broken down bulldozers. We ventured into the quarry cave probably 200 feet in, took some pictures and went back outside. There was standing water inside, and we wanted to be as safe as possible. Not knowing how sturdy the ceiling was or how deep the water was. Coming outside, we kept hearing some really strange animal noises. We live in rural Kentucky, so we see bobcats, mountain lions and bears a lot, but usually deep in the woods, which we weren't in at the time. We usually always carried a machete for tearing weeds down and just general safety. We're standing outside of the quarry cave and we're hearing this weird growling, not like a bear or a dog, not like anything we had ever heard before. We had flashlights and we shined them around, looking on the hill surrounding us, and found these huge greenish reddish eyes staring at us. We all looked at each other like, what the hell is that? Whatever it was standing at least 9 feet tall, but it was standing like a human, not like a bear would. It was massive. We could see fur and its head was massive. Its eyes were a good foot or 2 apart, and we kept standing there looking at it, honestly in shock. We started walking fast up the hill, and it was following us along the hill line. We finally made it to the gate, and when we turned around, it was standing around 30 feet away from us. What we saw wasn't a bear. I've seen black bears around my house plenty of times. We still talk about it to this day. I still believe it was a Bigfoot. My friends think it was too. I've looked up information about the descriptions of other people's sightings, and ours sounds very similar to others, especially the eyes. Some friends and I were going to go hiking on the weekend. We'd usually do this and bring some other friends with us, and would try to find new places to go often. Near my town there's a small inactive volcano which has a cavern system, and for a while now another friend and I have been trying to map the thing out. While I went up with my mates in September, we got inside the main cave, which is about a mile long, up until a point where you can't go any further without spelunking gear and is God knows how deep. And I was leading the group, as I'd been there the most. Because it was a leisure trip, we were going to have a good time joking, having fun, the usual stuff. In that spirit, I thought it would be funny to put some ambient to the activity, and played some Aghast, an atmospheric black metal band that supposedly used summoning rituals in their recordings. To be honest, I've never believed that to be more than just a gimmick, because 90s black metal. Still taking into consideration everything, it may hold some truth. Everything was normal. The music played out from my Bluetooth speaker, and we did the whole tour, and on the way back I was leading the group out, and the last bloke in the line asked us to lend him our torches so he could snap a group picture. We just turned 180 and did so, posing and kept hiking. We got out, we got home, and called it a day. And this is where stuff gets interesting. Normally after a long hike I tend to sleep really soundly when I arrive home, but that night I kept feeling uneasy, like something bad was going to happen. I didn't sleep much. The next day one of my mates posted a picture, and we noticed that indeed something was next to me in one of the pictures. So I guessed that was the reason, that when I got home that night I swear I could see the thing for glimpses, with its pale face and pitch black eyes just staring at me, like it was sizing me up for something. When I went to bed, I wanted to crap myself. I could see it standing by the door, getting closer to me. At some point, I just started cursing at it, telling it that if it wanted to go down in my own home, I would put up a damn fight. And surprisingly, that thing looked puzzled at that. Like an actor that doesn't know how to follow with another actor ad-lib something. I kept at that, and it just left. This thing didn't surrender though, just for a couple of weeks. It started throwing pebbles at my window and making strange noises. But little by little it just stopped, as if it got bored. My two friends and I were hiking in a national park. We decided to hike the trail, which had much less traffic, and arrived early in the morning. My friends and I did smoke a little bit of the green stuff, but we're not high out of our minds. We were talking about peyote and its psychoactive substance, mescaline, when an older man dressed in shorts, hiking boots, a shirt, sun hat, and with a walking stick overheard us talking about this and decided to get up from the rock he was sitting on to join us on the rest of our hike. We arrived at the entrance of the cave. The older man stayed back while my friend and I explored it. It was very narrow, but opened up to somewhat of a belly room. One way in, one way out. We came back, greeted the man, and he told us he wanted to explore it as well. We told him we would wait for him at the entrance. Mind you, this cave wasn't very deep, and we were in there for a total of 5 minutes. After waiting for him for 15 minutes, we decided to go grab him. When we got into the cave, he was gone. The only thing left was his walking stick sitting in the center of the cave. We called his name and even climbed up into a crevice to see if he had somehow gotten stuck. He wasn't there. Creepiest thing I ever experienced. My family and I were having a trip out to the countryside when my youngest cousin found a little cave just big enough for a child to enter. He started joking around with us, saying he was going into the cave even though his mother told him not to. But being a jovial 6-year-old, he went in anyway. And then there was complete silence. Remember, the cave entrance isn't very big. So after my aunt started shouting at him repeatedly to answer and come down and got no response, she began getting worried. She was scared that it was some kind of animal den, and the animal had got him. But being much larger than a 6-year-old, she was in a predicament, as she couldn't make her way down successfully into the tunnel. Then there was me, a skinny 15-year-old kid who was just small enough to fit through, but mature enough to handle a situation. I volunteered myself as tribute and made my way with my mum's phone as a flashlight into this small cave. It was smelly to say the least, and the further I went in, the bigger it got. There, at the back of the cave, was my cousin. He was passed out. I shined the phone flashlight around in all directions and couldn't see anything amiss. So I gave him a gentle kick in the stomach and asked him if he was okay. He didn't respond, so I flipped him round and he was breathing. Had he fallen asleep? I wasn't entirely sure. I grabbed him and started pulling him out. The hardest part was getting him through the main hole, but he started waking up and crawled his way out by himself. His mother was furious, but the creepiest thing was when she asked what made him go in there in the first place. He said, "The little man asked me to come in, Mummy. He said he wanted some friends." "What little man? There was no one in there," I interject. There was the little man. He was about the size of my hand, and by the time I got inside, he told me to go to sleep, and I did. It was some of the creepiest stuff I've ever heard. There was no one else in that small cave, no little men. It makes me wonder what the hell he saw, or if he just imagined it. This happened to my mum. Back in her youth, she and her sister would go exploring the local fields. There was an old quarry that had long since been abandoned, and it obviously left a huge gap in the ground, where there was also a cave system. Her and her sister were always told never to go into the quarry, and especially to never set foot in the cave. They, of course, being young and silly girls, didn't listen. So my mum and auntie went in there one day with their friends to try and explore and see if they could find anything of interest. The quarry was chalk, I believe, so I'm not really sure what they were going to find. Point being, they went in, 4 of them in total. The youngest of their friends, Alyssa, was talking about how scary it was when she slipped and fell into the dark. There was a loud, resonating splash, and they looked down, and with just enough visible light, saw her gasping for her life. She couldn't swim. She was screaming and flopping around in the water. So my mum, who could swim, whether it was bravery or stupidity, jumped in after her. It was quite the drop, she says. She told me that when she hit the ice-cold water, it felt like her whole body was freezing up, and she found it hard to breathe. But the sheer determination to save her friend kept her going. She pulled her to the side where the edge was, and there was just enough room for them to hold onto. They called for help, and my grandfather came out with a rope and a bunch of the other men and managed to get them out. Both of them got hypothermia as that water was truly freezing, but fortunately they both survived. After that, they got the local government to close the entry and put a huge metal seal on it so that no one could enter. Turns out, they weren't the first people to go exploring, and in the past, other kids had gone in and actually passed away, meeting their end in the icy cold abyss, something that my mother's friend very nearly suffered. A family member of mine got caught in a silo. He fell in, and it was like quicksand and nearly drowned. He was buried up to his neck before it was shut down, and the sinker stopped. Occasionally the grain on the surface of the pile would crust over, because moisture makes grains sticky and form a hard top. This top is generally hard enough to walk on. The nature of the work was that the workers would enter the silo using rods and push the grains down and allow it to fall, stir, mix, and sink correctly. Basically, unstick it by pushing it. So that's what my family member was doing when he got stuck. He pushed some down and brought down a larger portion that must have had an air pocket below him, and the area he was standing on fell away. His feet were buried, and to lift them you'd need to overcome the weight of the grain, packing in and filling all available space. Not safe since the workers weren't tied off. Other persons in the silo were distracted working on another spot. Two-way radios don't work inside of them because they're silos, and also while pushing the grain down, the auger is running. Another hazard here is that at the bottom of them, they have augers, which are metal corkscrews that rotate to pull and push the grain, usually on a conveyor belt, to distribute them to the other silos or chutes. My family member said that if he'd have sunk another 2 feet, he'd have lost a foot in the auger. and then more as he sank, and then more again. Resolution is that after sinking up to his waist, he finally got his partner's attention, who ran outside to the control booth to shut off the auger. Then the fire department came and the EMTs. They worked for about 8 hours to unbury him. Directly lifting didn't work as the grains were too tightly packed together. It was a bit like trying to pull you out of concrete. They tried vacuuming the grains out of the way, and more spilled in to replicate what was removed. The only way to evacuate him of the grains was to reactivate the auger, which was a bad idea. They eventually sunk plywood into the grain around my family member, making a makeshift dam walling off the grain. They could then vacuum enough out to continue lifting without the grain replenishing. He spent 4 days in the hospital from mild crushing and pressure-related trauma, but generally did okay. There was also some muscle damage from failed attempts to pull him out, torn tendons and stuff. As you can imagine, that was a nerve-wracking day. A few years ago, a friend and I went to explore a nearby limestone cave. I had been there before, but never gone very deep. I have read of a waterfall which eventually leads to an expansive area beyond, so we set out to try and find the path. Since we'd never been on this route, we took turns going forward and checking back to avoid passing points of no return, without one of us being above with a rope to toss down. After the familiar route was behind us, we found a tight climb down. The squeeze was like going from the front seat to the back seat in a compact sedan that's vertical. No problem. Next we find a tunnel, wide but short. We took our packs and dragged them behind our feet, while we crawled maybe 15 to 20 meters. It was getting a little claustrophobic, but we knew what we were getting into. We came to a small opening about the size of half a bathroom. This space we could stand in, and so was a bit of a relief. The path forward was a small square tunnel, the same height as the previous route, but maybe 2 meters wide. We jokingly called it the coffin crawl. This route required us to go one behind the other, and led to a 90-degree turn. At the turn I could see this path continued on past the range of my headlamp, but mostly all seemed level and safe. At this point, slowly, it became apparent the path was getting more narrow ever so slightly. If we wanted to turn back, we would have had to have crawled backwards in single file. I could not speculate how far we had crawled, but it seemed like a very long way, until I could make out a small opening ahead, maybe the size of a cramped coat closet, but 2/3 of the height. At this point, that space was looking pretty comfortable, because it would mean we could at least turn around if we decided to return. Right before coming to the closet-sized space was the tightest squeeze I've ever tried in a cave. I had to place one arm ahead and drag one out to get my shoulder to fit diagonally. As my light illuminated the closet space, I could see a single stalagmite in the center and some bats resting on its walls and sloped ceilings. Small, mouse-eared bats were infrequent but not a shocking sight, until our voices disturbed them and they decided to exit, past our prone, one-by-one bodies. Their fluttering should have been non-threatening, but with the inability to get out it became very unsettling. It took a lot of mental control to avoid panicking from the lack of space, apparent lack of air, and astro-heebie-jeebies. After the bats had passed and I caught my breath and sanity, we entered the small opening. Upon the single stalagmite was a small note, the torn corner of a piece of notepaper. The note, in blue pen, read, "Nothing here." We had not found the path we sought, and instead found nothing. Where I grew up, there were a few storm drains that all went to the same pond. My friend Amanda and I were messing around in the woods near one of the openings, and we could hear this really sharp echoing cry that made us both nervous. We thought it was the wind at first, and then Amanda threw a rock into the opening, and it stopped for a minute. So at this point we figured it must be something alive. We climbed back out of the woods and went to the next pipe and could hear it there too. Now, I'm scared, and Amanda is trying to prove how she isn't afraid of anything. So we go to the next one. This one is quieter, so we go back in the other direction. Now I'm being a baby because it's raining a little and I'm not supposed to get my clothes wet. I was 9 at the time, so I'm begging Amanda to go home. As she stops to assure me we are safe, we hear this horrible deep wailing noise and start to panic. I can feel my pulse in my neck, and I'm sweating, and Amanda puts her face into the opening of the drain. The noise happens again, and Amanda takes off down the hill and into the pipe opening. I'm now crying because Amanda abandoned me in the rain, and there's a monster in the pipes. Amanda starts yelling my name, and I have to put my face into the opening to hear her. So now I'm really crying, and she tells me to call the fire department. So I run to the nearest neighbor and tell them to. I explain I don't know why we need to call, but Amanda is in the pipe outside their house. They get all snooty, because Amanda is the heaviest kid in the neighborhood, so they assume she got stuck. They called the non-emergency number, and a truck comes to remove the cover. Turns out Amanda recognized the sound of an angry cat and ran into the pipe. It was a mama cat and her kittens were stuck beneath the wire grate inside the drain, so the rain was drowning them and they were crying. Thanks to Amanda, they got all but one kitten out, and the mama cat in time before the rain got worse. She got to keep one of the kittens, and no one believed us even though we were both there and the fireman. No one believed she could fit into the pipe. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's video. I'm gonna be honest, after I did a collaboration with Raven Reads over on her channel, Cave Stories, it actually inspired me to do some of my very own. But if I'm honest, I think she found far better cave stories than these ones. These ones were good, but I think her ones were better. So if you want to hear those, do so. They are really good stories. But yeah, I still enjoy doing it. I haven't done cave stories in something like 3 years. Maybe 4 years. It's been a really, really long time. Because I remember the first time I did it, I actually got permission to use a clip from a guy from another channel called, I think it was just called Exploring Abandoned Mines. And he was really cool. I got to narrate one of his stories and use the clip from his video. But I haven't done cave stories since, mostly because they're so rare, but I really put the effort in and tried to find some. And, yesterday we got 4 more permissions, or 5 more, however many it was. And yeah, we could finish the video, which was really good. And a submission or 2 to really just finish off the video. So I'm glad that we could finally do it. It may be a while before we hear more cave stories, but I'll try gathering them up and hopefully we'll have a repeat at some point in the future. Hope everyone is well, that quarantine isn't destroying their souls. Nah, I'm only kidding. I'm sure you guys are all fine. Stay strong. That's it from me though. I think I'm gonna sign off now. I'm gonna stop babbling. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.